Hey Reddit, I've read a lot of posts here about cheating, and I always thought that could never be me. Not because I'm perfect, but because I thought I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. I've been married to my wife, Kay, for 10 years. We have one child together, a 6-year-old daughter. We met in college, fell hard, and built what I thought was a solid, forever kind of love. I've never been unfaithful, never even considered it until about 8 months ago. There's no easy way to say this. I cheated on her, but it wasn't with another woman. It was with a man. It happened with someone I've known for years, a coworker. Let's call him E. And I can't even explain it in a way that makes sense to me. I've never thought of myself as anything but straight. I'd never even looked at a guy that way before. And yet, something happened. Something I still don't fully understand. And now, every day I see my wife smile at me, I feel like I'm wearing a mask that's getting heavier by the hour.
It began so casually that if you told me then where it would lead, I would have laughed in your face. E and I had worked together for years. We'd grab drinks after work sometimes, talk about sports, complain about deadlines, nothing unusual. But last year, we were both put on the same late-night project that meant long hours in the office, just the two of us. One night, around midnight, we were sitting in the break room, exhausted, and the conversation turned personal. He asked if I was happy in my marriage. I gave the standard, "Yeah, sure." But he pressed. I don't know why, but I told him the truth. That things with Kay had felt flat for a while, that we were more like co-parents than partners lately, that I couldn't remember the last time I felt truly seen. He didn't judge. He just listened in a way I wasn't used to. It felt safe. Too safe. Over the next few weeks, we started sharing more. Stupid memes, personal fears, late-night texts, and then came the compliments, the subtle touches, a hand on my shoulder that lingered just a second too long. I told myself it was harmless, until it wasn't. It happened after we wrapped up that late-night project. We'd gone out for just one drink to celebrate finishing, but one turned into 3, then 4. We were sitting in his car because the bar had closed and neither of us was ready to go home yet. We were laughing about something stupid when the mood shifted. You know that moment where you suddenly realize the air feels different? He stopped laughing first, looked at me for a second too long, and before I could process what was happening, he kissed me. I should have pulled away. I should have said something, anything. Instead, I kissed him back. It wasn't just a drunken mistake. There was something electric in that moment, something I hadn't felt in years. We didn't go all the way that night, but a week later, we did. And after that, it became a regular thing. Lunch breaks, made-up late nights at work, the occasional excuse to meet on weekends. I told myself it wasn't real cheating because it didn't mean I didn't love my wife. But deep down, I knew it was exactly that. And the guilt started growing from the moment it began.
Once that line was crossed, everything in my life split in two. At home, I was the same husband and father I'd always been, making breakfast for my daughter, watching shows with Kay, helping with chores. On the surface, nothing had changed. But under that surface, everything had. I'd get texts from E in the middle of family dinners. Sometimes I'd sneak away to reply. Sometimes I'd just stare at the notification knowing I couldn't answer.
The tension was constant, this strange mix of adrenaline and shame. And here's the part I hate admitting. I didn't just feel guilt. I also felt alive, like some dormant part of me had been switched back on. It wasn't just about E. It was about being wanted, seen, touched, in a way I hadn't experienced in years. But that rush came with a cost. I started lying more about where I was going, who I was with, why I was late. I caught myself rehearsing stories in my head before I got home, so Kay wouldn't suspect anything. And yet she never asked, which somehow made it worse. It was a Saturday afternoon. Kay had taken our daughter to her mom's for the weekend, and I told her I was catching up on work. In reality, I invited E over. We ordered food, watched a movie, and, well, you can guess the rest. But afterward, we just lay there talking for hours. Not about work, not about what we were doing, about everything else. Childhood, fears, stupid dreams. At one point, he said, "You know, you can't keep this up forever." It hit me like a punch. I'd been treating this like some bubble outside of real life, but he was right. This wasn't a fling anymore. It was an entire second relationship. When he left that night, I sat in the quiet and realized I was in way over my head. It wasn't just cheating. It was an emotional connection I'd never expected, with someone I never expected. And for the first time, I was terrified. Not just of losing my wife, but of what the truth about me might actually be.
It happened at dinner one night. Kay and I were sitting with our daughter, and she was telling some long, animated story about school. I laughed at something she said, and my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was E. Just seeing his name on the screen made my stomach flip. Kay noticed. She didn't say anything in the moment, but later, when our daughter was in bed, she asked, "Who keeps texting you lately?" I froze for half a second too long. I mumbled something about work, and she let it drop, or at least pretended to. But I could tell she didn't fully believe me. It was the first time I felt the walls of my double life closing in. That night, lying next to her in bed, I realized I wasn't just lying to Kay anymore. I was lying to myself. I kept telling myself this thing with E didn't mean anything about who I was, about my marriage, about my identity. But the truth was starting to leak through the cracks, and I had no idea how much longer I could hold it together. A few days after that dinner, E and I met up for lunch. It started normally, joking, talking about work, but halfway through, he got serious. He said, "I can't keep being your secret forever." I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't smile. "You act like this is just something you do on the side," he said. "But we both know it's more than that. So what are we doing?" I didn't have an answer. I wanted to tell him it was casual, that it didn't mean anything, but that would have been a lie. I also couldn't tell him I was ready to blow up my marriage because I wasn't. Instead, I told him I needed time. He nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his face. On the drive back to work, my head was spinning. I realized I wasn't in control of this anymore. E wasn't just waiting for stolen moments. He wanted clarity. And sooner or later, Kay was going to demand it too. I was standing in the middle of two lives, and both were starting to pull at me from opposite sides. It happened sooner than I expected. One evening, after we put our daughter to bed, Kay asked me to sit down. Her voice was calm, but her eyes, they were sharp, searching. She said, "I don't think you're being honest with me." My chest tightened instantly. I asked what she meant, trying to play dumb, but she went on. You're distracted. You're on your phone all the time. You work late more than you ever have. And when I ask, you give me nothing. I told her it was just work stress, but she didn't buy it. Then she hit me with, "Is it someone else?" I swear my heart stopped. I wanted to deny it instantly to put this whole thing back in the box. But the way she was looking at me, I think she already knew the answer. I shook my head, said no, but it felt hollow coming out of my mouth. She didn't push further that night, but the air between us was different, heavier, colder. I knew from that moment on the clock was ticking. Either I told her the truth, or she'd find it on her own.
About a week after Kay's confrontation, I met E for coffee. He could tell something was off right away. I told him Kay was starting to suspect something. Instead of looking worried, he leaned back and said, "Then maybe it's time you decide." I asked, "Decide what?" Even though I knew exactly what he meant. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Either you tell her about us and stop hiding, or we end this." It wasn't a threat in a cruel way. It was more like he was exhausted, tired of being in the shadows, tired of being the secret I only acknowledged when no one else was around. I didn't answer him right away. I just sat there, staring into my coffee, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff with no way to climb down safely. If I told Kay, I risked destroying my marriage, my family, maybe even my own sense of who I was. If I didn't, I'd lose E, the person who, for better or worse, had made me feel alive again. It was the first time I realized, no matter what I chose, I wasn't walking away from this without losing something big.
2 nights after E's ultimatum, Kay and I had another quiet dinner. She barely spoke, and I could feel the tension radiating off her. Halfway through the meal, she put her fork down and said, "I can't live like this. If there's something you need to tell me, just say it." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because saying it would make it real. She shook her head and stood up, muttering, "I knew it," before walking into the bedroom and shutting the door. I sat at the table for a long time after that, staring at my plate, realizing I'd just crossed an invisible line. She didn't have proof, but she knew. And I couldn't unring that bell. That night I barely slept. I kept going over every possible way to confess, to explain, to make it sound like something other than betrayal. But there's no way to soften, "I cheated on you with a man." By morning, I knew I couldn't keep both lives going any longer. Something had to break. I just didn't know if it would be my marriage or me. The next evening, after our daughter went to bed, I asked Kay if we could talk. She sat across from me on the couch, arms crossed, eyes wary. I started with, "You were right. There's someone else." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. I told her it wasn't another woman. When I said it was a man, she blinked, like she wasn't sure she'd heard me right. Then she laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. I tried to explain that I hadn't planned it, that I never thought of myself that way before, that it wasn't about replacing her, but about feeling seen again. But the words sounded hollow, even to me. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just said, You could have told me you were unhappy. You could have told me something before you went there. I didn't have an answer for that, because she was right. By the time I left the room, she'd already started packing a bag to stay at her sister's. And I knew this wasn't just about the affair. It was about every silent moment that led us here.
Kay didn't want to talk to me for the first week after she left. Her texts were short, strictly about our daughter, pickup times, school events, nothing personal. When we finally met in person to hand over our daughter, she barely looked at me. I tried to apologize again, but she cut me off. I don't want your apologies. I just want honesty from now on, for her sake. It hit me then that this wasn't going to be a temporary separation. The way she looked at me, it was like she'd already erased me from the idea of us. E reached out during that time, asking if I was okay, but even with him, it felt different now. The thrill was gone, replaced by this heavy awareness of what I'd done and what it cost. I wasn't free. I was just untethered. No marriage, no real relationship, no clear sense of who I was anymore. And the worst part? I realized I had no idea if I ended my marriage because of E, or if E had just been the excuse I needed to end something that had been dying for years. After a couple more weeks, things with E started to fade too. We still talked, but it wasn't the same. Without the secrecy and adrenaline, the connection felt smaller. One night, I asked him straight out, "If I hadn't been married, would you have even been interested?" He hesitated before answering, "I don't know. Maybe not like this." It stung, but it also clarified something I'd been avoiding. E wasn't my future. He was the catalyst, the thing that cracked open a part of me I'd been ignoring. And now, without the affair holding us together, we were just two people who happened to cross a line together. No big romance, no meant to be. That realization hurt more than I expected, because it meant I hadn't just lost my marriage for love, I'd lost it for something that was never meant to last at all. With E fading from my life and Kay gone, I had no choice but to sit with myself, and that was the hardest part. I started therapy, partly to untangle my feelings about what happened with E, and partly to figure out why I let my marriage erode in silence for so long. The therapist didn't let me hide behind the affair. She kept bringing me back to the years before it, the unspoken resentments, the lack of communication, the way I shut down instead of opening up. Co-parenting with Kay was civil. We exchanged polite words at pickups and drop-offs, but the warmth was gone. I caught glimpses of her laughing with our daughter, and it hit me. She was still capable of joy, just not with me anymore. I also had to face the fact that I wasn't ready to put a label on my sexuality. What happened with E was real, but it didn't erase the love I'd had for Kay. And maybe that was the most confusing part. I didn't fit neatly into a box anymore, and I wasn't sure I ever would. It's been almost a year since everything fell apart. Kay and I are officially divorced. Our daughter's doing better than I feared. Kids are resilient in ways adults aren't. E and I haven't spoken in months. There's no bad blood, just nothing left. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about me, but I don't dwell on it. Therapy has taught me that the affair was a symptom, not the cause. I didn't cheat because I suddenly turned or because I stopped loving my wife. I cheated because I stopped showing up in my own life, and because I was too afraid to admit how disconnected I'd become. I don't have all the answers about my sexuality, and I'm okay with that. What I do know is that I'm done hiding from the uncomfortable conversations. Silence is what killed my marriage long before the cheating did. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Secrets don't just destroy relationships. They destroy the person keeping them. And I'm finally tired of living like a ghost in my own story.